He even gave the thief a name, Charlie Rosen. It was strange that he would invent a whole person, name included. He didn't even name the friend who was looking after his kids. In fact, that person ceased to exist. Charlie Rosen had stolen his kids, had killed Florence, had come to his home in Colorado and routinely taunted him, beat him, and he even declared that Hester had been sleeping with him. He remembered her now and was certain that she and Charlie were ganging upon him to make his life a living hell. In the last 6 months of his life, he would become increasingly agitated. Dad could not have a single visit wherein Grandpa would not mention Charlie. And then the violence started up again. In one visit, Grandpa accused Dad of beating Charlie and attacked him. After that, Dad's visits dropped to once a week, and he didn't stay long. Once, I went with him. It was the last time I saw my grandfather alive, and I will never forget it. Charlie was here again today, Grandpa told us as soon as we arrived. He told me I couldn't leave this room anymore. He'd trapped me here. Dad, this is where you live, my father tried to explain. See, here's a picture of Mother. Why would Charlie let you keep that? He killed your mother, you know, said Grandpa. Murdered her in her sleep. Mother had an aneurysm, said Dad. You and I decided together to unplug the machine. She died in her sleep, but no one killed her. No, it was Charlie. Grandpa's voice was not agitated. It was solid, like he knew, for a fact, what he was saying. He poisoned her. Made something go wrong in her head. I didn't know it then, but I realized it later after he introduced me to Hester. Conned me into marrying her. He's my personal demon, that Charlie. Dad finally had had enough. There is no Charlie, he said, nearly shouting. You aren't supposed to correct people who have dementia, it just confuses them more and makes them upset. But my father forgot this in that moment. Charlie is someone you made up. Mother died naturally. You met Hester at a coffee shop years after Mother died, and while she was not a nice woman, she was not unfaithful to you. Please, stop talking about Charlie. Dear Lord in heaven, said Grandpa. He got to you. He told you to say these things. You're part of it too. Grandpa, I said. Why don't we start a game of checkers? Usually he loved checkers. I don't want to play any fucking checkers, screamed Grandpa. I couldn't have been more surprised if he hit me. Grandpa had never used profanity in his life. My words, as he called them, were only used by dead men, as far as he was concerned. Not with you. Not with him. Charlie Rosen's pet demons. He comes to me every day. He talks to me about Florence. He taunts me. He reads my mind and he takes thoughts away and puts in new ones, worse ones. He tells me about how he rapes my little ones. How he and Hester keep them half-starved and chained in their basement. I can't stop him. He can go inside my mind. He's controlling me. We left after that, without saying goodbye. Driving home, I almost wanted to cry. This kind, loving man was ending his days as a raving, violent lunatic. It wasn't right. It wasn't fair. What kind of monster was this Charlie? That thought stopped me cold. For an instant, I had accepted that Charlie was real. Giving my head a shake, I resolved to think about something else. But an image of Charlie had been forming in my mind, beginning a few months back, when Grandpa had first started talking about him. I only now realized that when Grandpa spoke of this demonic man, I was picturing him in my mind, and I could see him as clearly as I could memories of real people. I thought of the last time I had visited Grandpa in that tiny house in the mountains of Colorado when I was a teenager, sitting at that little round table while Hester served us some of her inedible glop, and I would see a man standing in the corner of the kitchen, watching us eat. A tall, gangly man with leathery skin, stretched over sharp-looking bone and corded muscle. Shaggy gray hair hanging down, obscuring the upper part of his face, his smile stretching like a knife slash across his jaw. I thought of the wedding. I was 12 years old. I met Hester for the first time, and standing a ways behind her was that same man. I remember a family gathering at the facility Grandpa was concurrently staying at. Didn't we pass that man in the hall once? No, of course not. These were just images my mind had cooked up the more Grandpa talked about this shady character that never existed. The brain can do that, insert false people in your memory just because you decide, subconsciously, to remember them. It doesn't mean you're insane, it's just another way for your brain to play tricks on you. Grandpa had invented a person who he talked about with such conviction as though Charlie was real. So my mind had conjured up a Charlie Rosen. But there was no Charlie Rosen. Grandpa died 2 months later. I remember the funeral like it was yesterday. I still wake up at night in a cold sweat, remembering. Everything was normal at the start. My parents, my aunts and uncles, my wife and I, and our children, my brother and his wife, and their son, my cousins, their spouses and their children, we all gathered under the same roof, for the first time in years. No one was missing. No one was out of town and couldn't make it. Two of my cousins I hadn't seen since they were children. It was nice to catch up with them. The service was nice, as well. The pastor who served the spiritual needs at Grandpa's facility was the officiator. Grandpa looked calm and peaceful, so unlike what he had been in the last few months of life. I started to feel calm myself. Grandpa was where he belonged now, where the devils of his own fevered, decaying brain couldn't get to him anymore. And then we drove to the cemetery. The coffin was lowered. We all sprinkled a handful of dirt on the coffin and began our walk back to the cars. And then the gravedigger came out of the shadows to start shoveling the rest of the dirt. I could barely read the embroidered name tag on his coveralls. It looked like C. Rose, or C. Risen, or... No, it couldn't be. He was tall, gangly, with leathery skin, sharp-looking bones, corded muscle, long gray hair, and that smile that haunts my nightmares to this day. I watched as this phantom dumped shovelful after shovelful of dirt on my grandfather's coffin. He was laughing softly under his breath, but I have never heard such cruel laughter. Today, I felt like I had to write all this down, to make sure I remember it all before things get worse. Because today, my father called me to complain that Charlie was driving past his house and staring in his windows.